Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly on our topics this week. Make way for Clay at the ballot box. Make way for delay at KCI. And make no mistake, America is politically divided. Plus roasted toast. But we start with our Newsmaker segment and take a look at Missouri politics. Our guest is a former state representative who resigned shortly before his term expired. To talk about why and much more is Clay County Republican Kevin Corlew, an attorney with Shook, Hardy, and Bacon. Mr. Corlew, welcome to Ruckus. Good to have you in.
Glad to be here, Mike. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. Talk a bit about your experience in the state legislature. When were you elected? How long did you serve?
I was elected in 2014, served 4 years. I was grateful for the experience, honored to represent the people of Kansas City Northland in the legislature. Really honored to be there and be involved in some strategic policy making at the time.
It has been reported that you left the legislature before your term actually expired because of the Clean Missouri Amendment, which said people serving in the legislature could not work as lobbyists for 2 years. I read, however, your quote where you said that's not the case at all. That's not why you left early.
Well, Mike, I'm an attorney and I represent clients and I advocate for them in court and in other places to make sure that we work and advocate for their needs. The Clean Missouri plan on their 2-year cooling off period for legislatures is very undefined. It's very broad and just says you cannot advocate or be a lobbyist before any governmental entity. I think there's some problems with that, and that's ripe for challenge in court. In contrast to that, the legislature a couple years ago put into place a 6-month cooling off period, and it was directed towards the General Assembly. So if someone like me as a legislator gets out of the legislature, I can't go back and lobby my colleagues for the next session, which makes sense. But to just say any governmental entity puts at risk someone like me who might represent my clients before an administrative agency, before a zoning board, or something of that effect. And so I thought with 3 weeks left and not in session, that it would be prudent for me to be able to make sure that we don't cross some line unintentionally.
Does it make some sense to have a period of time between when someone leaves the legislature and when that person can lobby?
I think it does. I mean, I think there's some ethics issues that are important there. However, it has to be narrowly tailored. It must be a short window. It must be directed towards where you think the conflict would occur. A conflict may be between a legislator lobbying the legislature, but to put at risk somebody representing a client in front of a zoning board doesn't make any sense, and the length has to be narrowly tailored, like any non-compete agreement, which this is essentially what it is.
Do lobbyists perform a worthwhile function in the Missouri legislature?
You know, I think lobbyists...
And they get a bad rap a lot of the time.
Lobbyists do get a bad rap. However, I think what's more important is to look at the special interest behind them and driving them. But the lobbyist in himself or herself is simply an advocate for somebody to like in court, or it's an advocate in the legislature to try to advance policies that are important to them. But the position in and of itself is not evil.
The Clean Missouri Amendment calls for a nonpartisan demographer to redraw the state legislative districts after the 2020 census. Is there such a thing as a nonpartisan demographer?
You know, I think there's some real problems with that, and again, that's another aspect that might be challenged in court. But the problems with that is when somebody says we want equal districts, we want 50 districts of Republican and Democrat, that might sound good in principle. In fact, for me, who was a Republican serving in a district that only had 45% Republicans, that might sound good for me. But however, when you when you begin to look at what that really means, that you take an inner city district that might be 90% Democrat, or a rural district that might be 90% Republican, and to draw a 50-50 district, you have to have these very odd-shaped districts where you take an inner city district and draw it out to Sedalia, for instance. I don't think that we really realize what the impact of that is going to be.
Do you think this is just a Democratic plan to cut Republican control of the state?
Well, and I think so, perhaps, but it's short-sighted because, you know, if we look at the history of things, the pendulum swings from Republican to Democrat, and to try to make a system to fit your needs in the immediate is short-sighted and not worthwhile doing.
Might you run again for some office?
Perhaps, Mike. At this time, I'm going to take some time. I've got 3 kids at home. I'm going to invest in them. I'm going to work in the private sector, and I'm going to work in the civic arena to try to bring some of the things that I worked on in the legislature, for instance, transportation, to try to bring the region together to become a world-class transportation and distribution center.
Great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Come back in the future.
Thank you, Mike. I'd be glad to.
All right, great. That is former Missouri State Rep Kevin Corlew. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Jeremy LaFavor is a former state legislator in Missouri and is now with State Line Strategies. Annie Presley is a writer, publisher, and GOP fundraiser. Jamika Kendricks is an educator and education activist, and Patrick Tuohy is director of municipal policy at the Show Me Institute, a free market think tank. Welcome to all of you. Welcome back to all of you. Just think, while I was introducing the panel, there could have been at least 10 more Democrats announced they're running for president. We don't know that for sure, however. It's obvious that the upcoming mayor's election will contain a lot of discussion about the issues surrounding construction of a new one-terminal KCI. It's been 14 months since voters gave overwhelming approval to a plan to abandon the current airport and build a new one. Still, crucial and critical decisions remain unmade. Mayor Sly James says council members, some of whom are running to succeed him, should take a chill pill and stop stoking fear. A Kansas City Star story says it's commonplace around the country for new airport construction to take more time than expected and for costs to be higher than expected. So, Patrick, do you accept this premise?
Well, I think the premise is true. Certainly big municipal projects often run into cost overruns, but we haven't even begun construction. Right? We're just at the negotiation phase. You're absolutely right. It's more than a year after the people voted for something, but we don't know the cost. We don't know the details. The airlines haven't even signed off on this. So I think there is a reason for concern. And just telling people to take a chill pill is not sufficient.
Well, Patrick, before the election, weren't people told that the deal was pretty well put together and
Absolutely.
all set?
We had an idea of the cost, and we were going to start on construction. I think it was going to be finished by November 2021, and then we were told later, the city manager said, well, that number was never realistic. Jim Heater on this program said that he knew those numbers weren't real. So I think that people are absolutely right to be skeptical because nothing we've been told from City Hall has turned out to be true.
I think Jim Heater was saying city officials knew those numbers weren't accurate as well.
Apparently lots of people knew.
Jamika, I know you're interested in the airport and you're a Kansas City, Missouri resident. How do you feel about this delay?
I think that we are getting a lot of excuses for things that we should have done due diligence on before we brought it to the voters. Because I remember sitting and listening to folks say, are there going to be cost overruns? Have we projected for those? What are we going to do if this negotiation falls through? Because we were looking at Burns and Mack, and then we went to Edgemoor. And then to think about Councilman Wagner holding up C-Track and Clark Construction, which is the project construction person over there, is having issues. They're $300 million over what they were supposed to be. Well, we picked them to do ours because Edgemoor is a part of that. And we knew that they had issues in the past, so why didn't we account for that? So I just feel like our city council didn't do due diligence.
Jeremy, you think voters are having second thoughts about a new airport?
I don't think anybody's having second thoughts about a new airport, but I think that they're having second thoughts likely about this process. I think,
yes.
the hometown team initially was thrown out of the process because they didn't match up with the master bond
Burns and McDonald
legislation, Burns and McDonnell. But now the city council is looking at changing that, and so if they're going to change that, it seems to make sense to allow everybody to go ahead and come back into the process.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Well, right now, the current folks are saying that it's going to be $4 billion. The KC Star was all excited about how much money they saved him. Burns and Mac and AECOM are coming back saying it's a little less than $3 billion. If we can save money, and the only reason Burns and Mac was thrown out in the first place was because they wouldn't change the statute. Now they're going to change the ordinance. Let's go ahead and get it back
But do you really
and say
think those aren't going to go up?
Annie, it looks like you're not happy with the idea that this whole process might be scrubbed and started over.
Well, number one, we wouldn't even be where we are now had not the legislation passed that the voters supported.
Like 75% of the voters
Right.
approved.
They were
Yeah.
lied to.
But they support it because they know it needs to be done. But there's an environmental assessment that hasn't been completed, just a demo. Terminal A, the 8 airlines are negotiating among themselves. They pay for the entire airport. And if there is information that the city council is seeing from others who could possibly bring the cost down, it may be worth evaluating. But at this point, I don't think there's any
Well, I
real
would think
value
that
in scrubbing it.
the airlines are certainly going to be interested in saving over $1.5 billion, I would think.
But they don't
But
know
if
that
they
they
feel like
will.
their hands are tied now because we're tied to this really terrible process, I
They're
don't
in
think
the
that's good
driver's
for the
seat.
city.
If they want it changed, they can get it changed.
Patrick,
should
you
do
were
that.
troubled by this from the outset. I
Years
remember you
ago,
talking
yeah.
about it. Do you feel that your views have now been somewhat vindicated?
I mean, there's no satisfaction. And I don't know that anybody in Kansas City should be shocked that our city government is inept at handling a big project. Remember, we were told that the city wanted to handle this $1 billion project at Burns and Mac without bids. It was called a Swiss challenge. It was absurd. And
We
it
would have
went-
saved $2 billion if we went ahead and did that
We don't know
process
that.
in the first
Why,
place.
why would
We
you
would,
be
but you don't
confident?
know that.
Why would you be confident in anything the City Hall tells you? Let me ask you this. Does anybody here believe that the reason for the delay is $20 million baggage claim system?
No.
Absolutely
Does
not.
anybody here believe that public funds will not be used to build this airport?
No.
No.
Okay, so you don't believe the two biggest arguments that are being given to you by the city. Why would you believe anything else? It's absurd.
Does
Because it was
anyone
coming
here
from Burns and
believe that
McDonnell,
time's
that
up for this segment?
Okay.
Apparently not. Does anyone believe that time's up for this segment?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Okay, we know that. If you are relatively new to Kansas City or maybe too young, you may not know Clay Chastain's interesting background. Clay first came to public attention in the 1980s when he sought public support to repair then crumbling Union Station. His plan never got to the ballot, but a bi-state tax plan did, and Union Station was restored. Chastain later got light rail questions on the ballot several times and has run for mayor unsuccessfully on several occasions. Well, he's running again for mayor this year. This time he's taking on the Kansas City Star, whose editorial board questions his credentials. Clay says a vote for him in April is a vote against the Star. By the way, Clay is also an author. His book is titled Tilting at Windmills. Does that also describe his campaign for mayor, Annie?
No, that's an interesting question.
That's why I asked it.
Clay has this tenacity among Kansas City. There's just this group of people who love him saying what he says no matter how outlandish it is. And he has the willingness to stand at the grocery store to solicit enough signatures to get on the ballot over and over again. But I'm not very confident that he's going to make much of a headway among the 12 candidates who are now running for mayor. So as much as I appreciate all his ideas and his confidence that Kansas City can be the best city in America, I don't see that he will be our next mayor.
Let me put this same question to Jamaica. The title of the book is Tilting at Windmills. It's about his efforts to get Union Station restored. Does that title for his book pretty well describe his campaign for mayor?
I'm going to say yeah, because he's probably tilting at windmills and kind of out there. So I would say because it's airy. But with Clay Chastain, I think we give him too much attention. In the last
Well, he's a bona fide candidate.
But when
he's going
he
to be on
ran
the
the
ballot.
last time, he garnered 6.2% of the vote. And there were only 3 people in the race at that time. So it's not likely that Clay Chastain is going to garner enough support to actually become mayor. I think the important thing is to look at the issues that he's trying to put on the table. And I think those are valid issues like TIF, the Economic Development Corporation, transportation, whether it's the airport or streetcar, or even his thing, which is light rail. I think all those things are important, and as we are looking for our next mayor, those things need to be considered. So we should look at that, but not necessarily Clay.
Patrick, despite his eccentricities, does Clay Chastain bring to the table some good, interesting ideas?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if he has anything to offer that is, I mean, certainly the issues are important, but I don't know that he as an individual brings anything to the table that other candidates don't already have. But I will remind people that the only streetcar or light rail vote that ever won citywide was his.
And it was in 2006, and the city council later said, and there was a provision in the city charter that permitted this, that it could not be done. It was impossible to put it together the way that voters approved it. So in the mayor's campaign, we know the airport's going to be an issue. Jeremy, what other issues might people be talking about?
I think one of the bigger things is going to be the idea of affordable housing and transportation in the city. That seems to get a big discussion point. You know, and when it comes to our friend Clay, I'm sure many residents of Virginia have great ideas about Kansas City, but I think the 12 candidates who actually live in the city will come forward with a number of great ideas. And I think certainly when it comes to affordable housing and transportation and transit funding, I think those are big issues and big topics that need serious candidates and serious discussion.
Annie, how serious is the issue that Clay spends at least part of the year in places other than Kansas City, mostly in Virginia?
Well, apparently his family is in Virginia, but he they canvass him regularly in Kansas City. He has an address here, it works, and the rules are applied to him just as they are to all other candidates. So he's a legitimate candidate for Kansas City despite having residency in Virginia part-time. But I think crime is a big issue that we need to be looking at. I think piggybacking on what the governor is talking about, infrastructure and also workforce development, those are big issues for this mayor's race as well.
Patrick, you follow local politics closely. Does this anti-star strategy, is that likely to work?
I don't know that the star plays a big enough role in municipal politics that fighting them gets you any benefit, frankly.
Okay.
All right, we'll move ahead to something else. The old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, may well be true. Despite all the upheaval since Donald Trump's election as president, a Gallup study of 13,000 Americans shows the split between Americans' political positions was about the same last year as the year before. 35% identify as conservative, 35% as moderate, 26% as liberal. That adds up to 96%. The other 4% either didn't understand the question or didn't care to answer it. The study shows the GOP increasingly conservative at 73%. The Democratic Party became majority liberal at 51% for the first time. So when you think about these numbers, is it any surprise, Jeremy, that our government and our people seem increasingly at odds and divided?
Well, I don't know that that's an indicator of the source of the division. It certainly is reflective of, I think, people's attitudes right now and people being hyper aware and sensitive to the political machinations and the political ongoings of the country. We are sort of at a time, and I think this is probably historically true, when people want to choose sides and want to choose a team. And right now, I think our leaders in both parties are acutely taking advantage of that in ways that are not constructive. I'm hopeful and optimistic that with new leadership here in the next couple of years in either party, but certainly in the White House, that this continuation towards this division in our country will lessen once we get sort of more mature adults running the nation.
Well, what's going to change in the White House? They're not changing officials there. The president's going to be in office at least for another 2 years, unless there's impeachment.
In 2 years, and I don't think that there's really much chance that this president could get elected in 2 years. Of course, I didn't think that there was much chance that he would get elected before, but I think now that people have had a chance to really digest it, there's an awakening in this country, and people are much more acutely aware of the consequences of their voting decisions.
In a very general sense, Annie, how would you define liberal?
You know, I actually wrote down lots of government, tax. how I define liberal.
How do you define conservative?
I would say less government and fiscally conservative.
And moderate?
And moderate would be more government, still financially sound.
All right, Jamika, same question to you. How would you define a liberal?
How did I know you were going to come to me?
Wait, he started with me.
No, I knew after you said that, I knew he was coming to me.
Your intuition is strong.
So with liberals, I would say that's the party that is more focused on social equity. And with conservatives, I would say those are people who, and not party, but those are people who are more focused on the economy and morality. Because to me, liberals are often trying to create legislation that increases the level of social equity, or they're saying they want to. And conservatives are really focused on, and one of my co-hosts helped me to figure that out, how it looks for the economy, and making sure that we have legislation that legislates morality in a way that keeps us being the country they want us to be.
What about libertarians, Patrick?
What about libertarians?
I think maybe you're one.
I am not. I am not a libertarian, but I think I am not optimistic that any adults are showing up soon in American politics. I think the problem libertarians address this is not who we have at the wheel, but to extend the metaphor, the size of the car. My hope coming out of the Trump administration, by the way, I feel that Trump is a symptom of this problem, not a cause of it, is that liberals and conservatives look and say, oh my gosh, the risk of creating huge, powerful government is that we might get somebody we really don't like at the wheel. And so my hope is that liberals and conservatives can agree that we need to shrink the role of the federal government, certainly shrink the role of the president, bring power back to the states where we have more input into what goes on.
Well, the last time I checked, the government was still shut down, and I assume it is still shut down when the program appears on the air Thursday evening and probably again on Sunday morning. This is because of a dispute over the wall, primarily. Speaker Pelosi calls the wall immoral. Do you agree with that? Is a border wall immoral?
I think from a lot of perspectives, it's immoral. From the largest standpoint, I think it sends an immoral message to other nations where the Statue of Liberty is a moral symbol of the United States, whereas the wall would be the exact opposite moral symbol. And I think from a standpoint of just being wise with financial resources, it's immoral to waste that kind of money on something that won't work.
Annie, is a wall immoral?
I don't think a wall is immoral. I actually believe that the wall replaces the laws that we're not enforcing. We use natural barriers, rivers, mountains to use as a wall. We have a tremendous wall in place already that has holes in it. And if we fail to apply the laws as they now stand, the walls become the area that the laws can be broken. So we have to choose.
What
we
happens
need
when
to choose.
Mexico realizes that ladders exist?
Well, I don't know. Did you see that? Did you see the Marine who said, "Okay, so you've got a 30-foot wall, and now what? You get to the top, and now what?" I mean, it's not just like you just jump over the wall.
You take a ladder and put it over the other side.
For a quick,
$5.1 billion for a wall that is not going to cover all of the gaps and cover that entire border. That's ridiculous. We have way too many things that we could put that money towards in this country.
I'm
that
curious
would
to know what the
benefit
fiscal
quality life
conservative
of
thinks
us.
about the
I
waste of
think
money.
the question should be, should we have open borders? And if the answer is no, then do we allow ourselves to regulate who crosses those borders? That's really the question.
So
yes
the
or
wall
no?
is the
Yes
only
or no?
way?
Do we have fences and walls up now along part of the southern border?
Tons.
And they're
Yes.
designed
Miles and
to
miles.
point people
If they're
in certain
immoral, should they
directions.
be torn down?
I didn't say they're immoral, but I think it's
If they
ridiculous
are
to ask
immoral.
for that money when we're not going to cover the whole border.
Okay, now we're going to have to head to the soapbox for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to analyze, synthesize, or even compromise. Let's start with Jamika.
Mine is very easy today. I am toasting Kansas City Public Schools because my children go there, and I worked hard to help us to get accredited, and we have achieved the points for accreditation for the second time in 3 years for full accreditation, and we hadn't done that previously for 30 years, so very exciting.
Congratulations.
That's great.
Jeremy.
My toast is for the voters of Kansas, who this week ushered in a new era of progress, leaving behind an era of failed tax policies and economic ruin. They brought in a fantastic leader in Laura Kelly. And so congrats to Kansas, and a toast to Kansans and their very bright future.
Patrick.
My toast is for the linemen of the KCP&L for their work restoring power to thousands of Kansas citizens following the storm. These men worked long hours in brutal conditions. Events like this remind us of how much we take basic infrastructure for granted, but civilization is built and maintained by those men on the front lines, and we ought never forget that.
Annie.
Mike, I am toasting Mayor Sly James. As his swan song going out of Kansas City, he wants to provide pre-K for all kids in Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm not sure his plan is perfect, but I really applaud him for trying, because I know that if a kid gets to 3rd grade and can't read, they will not graduate.
Finally, Democratic Congressman Robert Francis O'Rourke, who likes to be called Beto, is seen as a potential presidential candidate. He's keeping his fans updated by going on social media with coverage of his latest visit to a dental hygienist.
I'm here at the dentist, and we're going to continue our series.
Hi, I'm Diana. I was actually
on the people of the border. I'm here with Diana.
Obviously, Beto is promoting tooth in advertising. And that's Ruckus for this week. Back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Ruckus and the crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.
Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Hush Blackwell, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, and by viewers like you. Thank you.